So if you want to use Flexbox, the first thing you do is set the display to Flex. Flex is on block level, which means that it will take up the whole screen, but we can also use Inline-flex, which will only take as much as size as it needs, and that depends on the items inside it. Another important property is flex direction, which by default is set on row, and you can use that to create horizontal layouts. We also have row reverse, which goes from right to left, and it also changes the order of the elements inside the flex container. You also have column, which is used to create vertical layouts, and if you don't specify any width for the elements inside, then they will fill up the whole screen. But if we do, let's say a box has a width and height of 250 pixels, then they won't stretch. There's also another property which is called flex wrap, which by default is set on no wrap. So let's change it to wrap and see what it does. So no wrap basically causes your items to shrink if they are taller than the flex container itself. And if you use wrap, then they won't shrink and they will overflow if they don't fit inside the container, just like we see here. Okay, I will get rid of the width now because I want to show you something. And I will replace it with flex grow and give it a value of 1. So there are 3 boxes here and they all have a flex value of 1. And if you add these values up, you get a total value of 3 because there are 3 boxes. So the flex container has a total flex grow value of 3, which means that each box takes 1/3 of the total space. And this makes sense because if you would add them up, you would get 3 by 3, which is 1, which is the total space. So let's give each of these boxes a different value. I will change this to 2. I leave this one as it is, and I change this to 3. So at this moment, the total flex value is 6, because 2 plus 1 plus 3 is 6. So box 2, for example, will only take 1/6 of the total space, but box 3 will take 3/6 of the total space, which is half of the space. So flex grow deals with adding space, but we also have flex shrink, which will control how it will shrink in case it wouldn't fit inside the flex container. And at this moment, all the flex shrink values are by default set to 1, which means they will all shrink. We also have something called flex basis, and it's by default set to auto, and it will look up the main size of the item and define a size based on that. So if we set one of these shrink values to 0, and set the flex basis value to, let's say, 350 pixels, then that box will not shrink. Now, most of the time you will see that the flex property is being used instead of the flex grow property, but it's because the flex property is a combination of flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. So the first value that you enter is the flex grow value. The second is the flex shrink value. And the third is the flex basis value. So now we can get rid of these, because instead of specifying them all separately, we can now do it all at once. And in most cases, we only use flex grow because the default values of flex shrink and flex basis are okay like that. And in most cases, we don't need to change them. Okay, we are almost done. There are only a few properties left that we really need to see. And one of them is justify content. And it's used to align the items on the main axis. Now, what is the main axis? It's the current direction that we are working in. And in this case, the flex direction is set on row. So the main axis is the horizontal axis. Justify content is by default set to flex start, which aligns the items on the left side of the flex container. But we also have flex end, which aligns the items on the right side. If you want to center the items in the main axis, you can do that by using center. But what if we also want them to be centered in the cross axis? The cross axis is the opposite of the main axis, so the cross axis is the vertical axis. And to do that, we have to use align items, which is the same as justify content, but the only difference is that it aligns the items in the opposite direction. We also have space around. And as you can see, the gap here is much bigger because we add from both sides. So if you want everything to be evenly spaced, you use space evenly. And we also have space between.